There's a final exam for life, and the main subjects are physics and common sense. The 10 people you're about to see, they all flunked in spectacular fashion. This is your study guide on what not to do. Your only homework is to not end up in our next video. You have been warned. 1. The slowest getaway. Our first story takes us to the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, home to hard workers, strong opinions, and a man named Gary whose relationship with the law was, let's say, complicated. After a few too many celebratory beverages one night, Gary found himself on the losing end of a conversation with a state trooper, which resulted in his driver's license getting suspended. For most people, this would be a wake-up call, a time for reflection and maybe investing in a bicycle. But for Gary, a suspended license wasn't a punishment. It was a puzzle, a challenge. He sat in his garage, staring at his prized pickup truck, a monument to his now forbidden freedom. But then, his gaze shifted. In the corner, gleaming under a single dusty light bulb, sat his riding lawnmower. A John Deere, green and yellow, a symbol of suburban responsibility. And in that moment, a truly terrible, brilliant idea was born. They suspended my driver's license, he probably reasoned, not my lawnmower operator's permit. He had found a loophole, a glorious 5-mile-per-hour loophole. His destination? The local bar, a good 5 miles down a winding country road. The journey there was his triumphant parade. He rumbled along the shoulder of the road, the mower's tiny engines screaming in protest as cars whizzed past. He probably felt like a revolutionary, a modern-day Paul Revere on a steed of pure defiance, off to warn the pub that happy hour was coming. At the bar, he was a legend. Patrons bought him drinks, slapped him on the back, and toasted his genius. He had beaten the system. Hours later, filled with cheap beer and an inflated sense of accomplishment, he began his slow-motion return trip. It was now pitch black. The 55 Mott road was unlit, and his lawnmower's single, dim headlight did little more than illuminate the occasional moth. He was the slowest, most vulnerable rebel in history, humming along in the darkness. Meanwhile, a truck driver, finishing a long haul, was coming up behind him. This driver was doing everything right, obeying the speed limit, watching the road. But the human brain is wired to expect certain things on a highway at night: cars, other trucks, maybe a deer. What it is absolutely not programmed to anticipate is a tiny, barely lit vehicle moving at the speed of a brisk walk. From the truck driver's perspective, Gary's taillight would have seemed like a distant, stationary reflector. By the time he realized that the dim red dot was not only close, but also moving incredibly slowly, it was too late. The laws of physics, unlike the laws of the DMV, offer no loopholes. The impact was swift and final, turning Gary's chariot of defiance into a mangled heap of green and steel. He had spent his day so proud of outsmarting a traffic law that he completely forgot about the much more permanent laws of mass and velocity, proving that sometimes the cleverest solution is also the dumbest one. 2. The strongman versus inertia. Alright, for this next one, forget everything you know about gym workouts and personal bests. We're heading to Brazil to meet a local legend, Marco the Titan, a man who was about to have a very public, very final debate with science. Marco was a strongman, a mountain of a man whose reputation was built on lifting colossal stones, pulling trucks with ropes, and generally treating gravity like a minor inconvenience. His ego was as developed as his biceps, and after years of local praise, he began to believe he was invincible. His latest boast, made loudly in bars and gyms across town, was his most ambitious yet. He claimed he could stop a moving city bus with his bare hands. To his followers, this was the ultimate test of his power. To anyone with a basic understanding of physics, it was a suicide note. The day of the stunt arrived, and a crowd gathered. Marco, beaming with confidence, took his place in the middle of the street, chalking his hands as if preparing for a deadlift. The local bus rumbled into view. The driver, a man named Paulo, knew of Marco's reputation. Seeing the strong man in the road, Paulo did what he thought was the sensible thing. He slowed down, assuming it was a joke, a performance, and that Marco would step aside at the last second with a theatrical flourish. This was his fatal miscalculation. Seeing the bus slow to a crawl, Marco's confidence surged. It looked less intimidating now, manageable. He braced himself, planting his feet on the asphalt, digging in like he was pushing against a sled. He was ready to become a god. The crowd held its breath. The bus, weighing over 10 tons, was now moving at just a few miles per hour. But this is where the lesson begins. An object that heavy, even moving slowly, possesses an immense amount of inertia, a relentless, unstoppable desire to keep moving forward. It's a force that doesn't care about your workout routine or your local reputation. As the bus made contact, Marco met it with a mighty shove. For a split second, nothing happened. And then, reality delivered its verdict. The bus did not stop. It didn't even seem to notice him. It simply rolled forward, its massive weight and momentum casually dismissing Marco's strength as irrelevant. The man who could lift a car was no match for the simple, unfeeling math of motion. The crowd's cheers turned to screams of horror. The driver, Paolo, felt a slight bump and looked in his rearview mirror, his face turning pale as he realized the performance was not a joke. Marco the Titan had made his final boast. He had challenged a fundamental law of the universe, and the universe, without ceremony or emotion, had enforced its rule, proving that while bravado can make you famous, it's physics that writes the final chapter. 3. The Wellness Warrior's Last Supper. Let's dive into the wild world of social media, a place where online wellness culture and a deep distrust of science can create a truly lethal cocktail. Meet Cassandra, a passionate social media influencer determined to prove to her thousands of followers that a vegan diet was the key to universal enlightenment, not just for humans, but for all creatures. Her latest project was converting her pet cat, Mittens, to a plant-based lifestyle. This, for the record, is a terrible idea, as cats are obligate carnivores and require nutrients found only in meat to survive. But Cassandra, armed with blog posts and a deep distrust of conventional veterinary science, was undeterred. She refused to buy commercial vegan cat food, deeming it too processed. Instead, she set out to create her own artisanal high-protein blend from scratch, using wild plants she foraged herself from a nearby meadow. She was confident in her amateur botany skills, identifying what she believed were nutrient-rich greens and protein-packed roots. She blended her concoction into a green pulpy mash and presented it to Mittens with the flourish of a Michelin star chef. Mittens, being a cat with a few million years of evolutionary wisdom, took one sniff, looked at Cassandra with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust, and walked away to go nap in a sunbeam. Her rejection was absolute. For Cassandra, this was not just a culinary failure, it was a public relations crisis. Her followers were watching. She had promised them a revolutionary pet diet, and the star of the show had just given it a 0-star review. Backed into a corner by her own pride, Cassandra's ego wrote a check her body couldn't cash. She turned on her phone's camera, went live on social media, and declared, "Mittens is just being fussy. This blend is so pure, so healthy, I'll eat it myself to prove it." With a defiant look at the camera, she spooned a large portion of the green sludge into a bowl and began to eat it with gusto, describing the earthy, vibrant flavors to her audience. What she didn't know was that one of the protein-rich greens she had so confidently foraged was water hemlock, one of the most violently toxic plants in North America. Her point was made. She had won the argument against her cat. But as the potent neurotoxins began their work, she learned a brutal lesson. Her cat wasn't being fussy, it was being smart. In her desperate quest for online validation, Cassandra had ignored the wisdom of both science and nature, a mistake for which she paid the ultimate price, leaving behind a confused cat and a final tragic social media post that served as her own digital obituary. 4. The Pocket Rocket. Let's head back to the sun-drenched countryside of Brazil, where the fields are vast and the safety regulations are sometimes treated more like gentle suggestions. Our protagonist is a farmer named Rodrigo, a man of simple solutions. He believed in hard work, a sturdy tractor, and the idea that the most direct path was always the best one, even if that path was paved with catastrophic risk. Rodrigo had a problem. A stubborn, massive boulder was sitting right in the middle of a field he needed to plow. Pushing it with his tractor was a no-go. So he turned to the farmer's universal solution for immovable objects: dynamite. He drove his old, rattling pickup truck into the nearest town and purchased several sticks of high-grade explosives from a hardware store that operated on a "don't ask, don't tell" policy. Now came the crucial part of the plan: transporting the dynamite back to his farm. A sensible person might place the explosives in a padded box, secure it carefully in the truck bed, and drive home as if they were transporting a Fabergé egg filled with nitroglycerin. But Rodrigo was a man of efficiency, not caution. He looked at the dynamite sticks. He looked at his truck. He decided that the safest, most secure place to carry these notoriously unstable explosives was to simply tuck them into the front of his pants. In his mind, this was a stroke of genius. He could keep an eye on them, they wouldn't roll around in the back, and his own body would act as a natural cushion. What could possibly go wrong? With the dynamite nestled snugly against his waistband, he hopped into his truck and started the bumpy 5-mile journey home on a poorly maintained dirt road. The truck bounced and jostled over every pothole and rock. With every bump, the dynamite sticks rubbed against each other and the rough denim of his jeans. This created friction. Friction creates heat, and dynamite, as you may know, has a very volatile and deeply personal relationship with heat and friction. Rodrigo was probably humming a tune, thinking about the magnificent explosion that would soon solve his boulder problem, completely unaware that he was hosting a ticking time bomb in his trousers. He was so focused on the big boom he was planning that he ignored the small, incredibly dangerous one he was creating. The inevitable happened somewhere around the 3rd mile. The constant friction reached a critical point. A single, final jolt from a particularly nasty pothole was all it took. The dynamite didn't just ignite, it detonated. The resulting explosion was contained, powerful, and tragically precise. The cab of his truck was instantly engulfed in a violent blast, turning his short, efficient trip into a very messy and very final one. When authorities arrived at the scene, they were met with a baffling mystery: a truck with a completely obliterated driver's side and a perfectly intact passenger side. It was a short, one-way trip that ended with a bang, proving that while dynamite is an excellent tool for removing obstacles from a field, it is a profoundly terrible choice for a pocket accessory. Rodrigo's simple solution to a transportation problem became a permanent solution to all his future problems. 5. The mermaid's last swim. Some people have quirky beliefs, and some people let those beliefs write a check their body can't cash. On the windswept shores of England, we meet Ilara, a woman who was convinced her identity was more myth than reality, believing with every fiber of her being that she was not entirely of this world. She believed with every fiber of her being that she was a mermaid in a past life, temporarily trapped in a human body. This wasn't just a quirky hobby, it was the core of her identity. She was an exceptionally strong swimmer, spending hours every day in the ocean, feeling more at home in the cold water than on dry land. Her friends and family saw it as an eccentric passion, but for Ilara, it was a calling. She decided it was time to prove her true nature to the world and to herself. Her ultimate goal: to swim across the English Channel, one of the most treacherous and challenging bodies of water on the planet. But she wasn't going to do it like a mere mortal. The official way to cross the channel involves support boats, crews, navigators, and strict safety protocols. Ilara saw these precautions as an insult to her abilities, a crutch for land dwellers. She would do it the way a mermaid would, alone, unassisted, with nothing but her own strength and the sea she considered her true home. She told no one of her final plan, slipping away to the coast on a gray, overcast morning. She stood on the shore, the frigid waves lapping at her feet, and felt a sense of profound belonging. This swim, she believed, would be her triumphant return, a shedding of her human limitations. She dove into the icy water and began her journey. For the first few hours, her powerful strokes and deep connection to the water served her well. But the English Channel is not a fairy tale lagoon. It is a cold, unforgiving highway for massive cargo ships, with powerful, unpredictable currents and water temperatures that can induce hypothermia in even the most seasoned swimmers. As the hours wore on, the immense physical toll began to set in. The cold gnawed at her, seeping deep into her bones, slowing her movements, clouding her judgment. The powerful currents, which she had underestimated, began to pull her off course, dragging her further out into the open sea. Her mythology had not prepared her for the brutal, indifferent reality of the ocean. There was no magical transformation, no surge of aquatic power. There was only a human body pushed far beyond its limits, fighting a losing battle against an opponent that never gets tired. Her belief in being a mermaid was strong, but the reality of being a human in peril was stronger. When she didn't return, her family raised the alarm and a search was launched. Days later, her body was found, a tragic testament to the danger of letting a beautiful myth overwrite a deadly reality. Alara had tried to prove she was a creature of the sea, but in the end, the sea claimed her as just another victim of its immense and unforgiving power. 6. The 4D Horror Show. You ever get so into a movie you feel like you're really there? Well, for a man in Germany, that experience became a little too real. Meet Klaus, a middle-aged gentleman with a passion for horror films and, unbeknownst to him, a seriously weak heart. He loved the thrill, the jump scares, the feeling of being terrified in a safe environment. So, when a new, highly anticipated horror blockbuster was released in 4D, Klaus was first in line to buy a ticket. For those unfamiliar, 4D cinema isn't just about watching a movie. It's about experiencing it. The seats vibrate and lurch, jets of air blast you in the face, mists of water spray you, and even scents are pumped into the theater to match the on-screen action. It's designed for maximum, over-the-top immersion. Klaus settled into his plush, high-tech seat, popcorn in hand, ready for 2 hours of manufactured terror. The movie began, and it was everything he'd hoped for. The sound was deafening, the visuals were terrifying, and the 4D effects were relentless. As the killer on screen stalked his victim through a creaky old house, Klaus's seat rumbled with every footstep. When a ghostly figure lunged at the camera, a sharp blast of cold air shot at his neck, making him jump. During a tense scene in a damp, musty basement, a faint, mildewy smell was pumped into the air. Klaus was loving it. His heart, however, was not. With every jump scare, his adrenaline spiked. With every sudden seat movement, his blood pressure surged. He was in a state of constant, heightened stress, but he was so caught up in the film that he didn't recognize the very real physical signals his body was sending him. The climax of the movie arrived. A chaotic, terrifying sequence of a demonic entity attacking the main character. On screen, there were flashing lights and screaming. In the theater, the seats were bucking and vibrating violently. Jets of air were firing from all directions, and strobe lights mimicked the on-screen lightning. It was sensory overload, a perfectly engineered assault on the nervous system. For Klaus's already strained heart, it was the final straw. In the middle of the most terrifying scene, as the audience around him screamed with delight, Klaus slumped over in his seat. He had suffered a massive, fatal heart attack. The combination of intense psychological stress and powerful physical stimuli was simply too much for his body to handle. The very technology designed to make the horror feel more real had created a situation that was, for him, genuinely fatal. He had gone to the cinema seeking a safe thrill but found a terror so immersive that it followed him right out of this world, making him the tragic star of his very own and very final horror show. 7. Alright, some bad ideas are classics for a reason. Take Russian Roulette. But in Houston, Texas, our protagonist Ricky decided a classic wasn't good enough. He had to innovate, hosting a masterclass in profound ignorance as he introduced his friends to a game steeped in cinematic lore and real-world stupidity, Russian Roulette. The classic version of this game is already a terrible idea, a 1 in 6 chance of a catastrophic ending played with a revolver. But Ricky, in a moment of what can only be described as next-level innovation and self-destruction, decided to add his own unique modern twist. He didn't own a revolver. Instead, he proudly presented his firearm of choice for the evening, a semi-automatic pistol. For anyone with even a passing knowledge of how firearms function, this is the moment the record scratches and the entire room should scream, "No!" A revolver works with a rotating cylinder. You can leave chambers empty, creating that infamous element of chance. A semi-automatic pistol, however, is a machine designed for ruthless efficiency. When you pull the trigger and a round is fired, the mechanics of the gun automatically eject the spent casing and load the next live round from the magazine into the chamber, ready to fire again instantly. There is no chance. There is only next. Ricky's friends, likely as mechanically illiterate as he was, watched with a mix of morbid curiosity and drunken encouragement. Ricky, beaming with the misplaced confidence of a man who thinks he's a cool movie character, loaded a single bullet into the magazine, inserted it into the pistol, and racked the slide. This action, of course, moved the one and only bullet directly into the chamber. The game was already over before it began. He held the pistol aloft, a look of theatrical bravado on his face. He was no longer just Ricky from accounting. He was a daring risk-taker, a man dancing with fate. He put the gun to his head, probably delivered a cool-sounding but ultimately meaningless one-liner, and pulled the trigger. The resulting click of the hammer on an empty chamber never came. Instead, the deafening bang was followed by a stunned silence. His friends watched in horror as Ricky received a sudden, brutal, and irreversible lesson in firearm mechanics. He had set up a one-player game with a guaranteed loser. He didn't understand the difference between a game of chance and a machine of certainty. In his attempt to play a game with death, he forgot to read the instruction manual, discovering in his final moment that a semi-automatic doesn't play games. It just works. 8. There's a certain beauty to urban decay, to the ghost towns of industry. But for one explorer in the ruins of Detroit, the decay he so admired decided to get up close and personal. Our story follows an urban explorer we'll call Alex, a young man who saw beauty in decay and sought adventure in forgotten places. He was part of a subculture that thrives on trespassing into abandoned factories, hospitals, and warehouses, documenting the eerie beauty of their collapse. On this particular day, he was navigating the cavernous ruins of a massive, long-defunct chemical plant. The place was a maze of rusted steel, shattered glass, and peeling paint, a cathedral of corrosion. Armed with his camera and a flashlight, he felt a sense of awe, a feeling of being the last man on Earth. High above the factory floor, a series of catwalks crisscrossed the darkness, connecting different sections of the plant. Alex, looking for a dramatic shot, decided to cross one of these high, narrow walkways. It was heavily rusted, but to his eyes, it looked sturdy enough. He took his first few steps, the metal groaning under his weight, the sound echoing in the vast, silent hall. He was about halfway across when the decay he so admired decided to get personal. With a sharp, screeching tear, the rusted metal gave way. The catwalk buckled, and Alex plunged into the darkness below. His fall was broken by the surface of a murky liquid in a massive, open-topped vat directly beneath him. As he thrashed in the initial shock, a wave of relief washed over him. He had survived the fall. He assumed he had landed in a pool of stagnant, greasy rainwater, a common feature in such ruins. He tried to swim to the edge of the vat, his hands searching for a grip on the slimy interior wall. But then, a new, horrifying sensation began. A sharp, searing pain. He looked at his hands and saw his skin turning an alarming shade of red, blistering before his very eyes. The liquid wasn't water. The vat he had fallen into was, in fact, filled with a highly corrosive industrial acid, a forgotten remnant of the factory's active days, which had been sitting there for decades, stewing in its own malevolent potency. The water that saved him from the fall was now methodically and efficiently unmaking him. His relief turned to sheer, unadulterated terror as the acid began its work. He had spent his day seeking the thrill of decay, only to become a part of it in the most intimate and horrific way imaginable. He had documented the slow, quiet death of a factory, and in a final, tragic irony, the factory documented the very fast, very loud death of him. 9. Hollywood has taught us a lot of things about survival, most of which are completely wrong. In the misty mountains of China, a young hiker named Chen was about to learn the difference between movie physics and real-world gravity the hard way while out with his friends, enjoying the lush green landscape. The rain had turned the trails to mud and saturated the ground, creating hidden dangers. On their path, they came across a large, ominous-looking pit of what was unmistakably quicksand. It was a churning, soupy basin of mud and water, a natural trap. His friends looked at it with caution and respect, giving it a wide berth. But Chen saw an opportunity. He saw a stage. He had watched countless adventure movies and survival shows, and he was convinced he was an expert on the subject of quicksand. A wide, confident grin spread across his face. "Guys, don't worry! I saw how to survive this in a movie," he announced excitedly. His friends tried to dissuade him, but Chen was on a mission to demonstrate his superior knowledge. He explained the Hollywood method. You must not panic, you must lie flat on your back to distribute your weight, and then you can gently swim or backstroke your way to safety. To prove his point, with the flair of a seasoned stuntman, he took a running leap and jumped directly into the middle of the pit. The reality of his situation hit him instantly, and it was nothing like the movies. Real quicksand isn't a soupy liquid you can float on. It's a hyperdense slurry of sand, clay, and water. Instead of floating, Chen plunged in up to his waist, and the thick, heavy mud gripped him like wet concrete. He had expected to be buoyant. Instead, he was anchored. Panic set in. He remembered the part about not struggling, but his instincts screamed at him to fight. He began to thrash wildly, trying to pull his legs free, but every movement he made only worked against him. The struggle created a vacuum around his legs, and the immense pressure of the surrounding mud packed in even tighter, wedging him deeper. His friends watched in horror from the edge, helpless, trying to find a long branch to reach him. But Chen was sinking fast. His confident demonstration had turned into a desperate, frantic struggle for air. He had jumped in to showcase his survival knowledge, but all he demonstrated was the critical difference between cinematic fiction and brutal, unforgiving physics. He had treated a deadly natural phenomenon like a theme park attraction, and the price of admission was his life. 10. And for our grand finale, we're exploring the delicate line between profound faith and profound stupidity. In a small village in Nepal, one holy man claimed he had conquered the power of electricity. Spoiler alert, electricity disagreed. This story is about a man named Raj, who had built a considerable local reputation not through meditation or wisdom, but through a very unique and very dangerous claim. He declared himself to be a holy man, a sadhu, who had achieved such a state of enlightenment that he was immune to the effects of electricity. To prove his divine power, he would perform a regular miracle for the villagers. He would take 2 live electrical wires connected to a low-voltage source, like a car battery, and hold them in his bare hands. The current would pass through his body, making his muscles twitch and his hair stand on end. But he would remain standing, a triumphant grin on his face. The villagers, lacking a deep understanding of electrical engineering, were in awe. They saw it as proof of his connection to the gods. What they were actually witnessing was the effect of a non-lethal current passing over the surface of his skin, a dangerous but survivable party trick. But with every successful performance, Raj's ego grew. He was no longer just a man. He was a conduit for divine energy. He decided it was time for his greatest feat yet, a miracle that would solidify his legendary status forever. He announced to the entire village that he would absorb the full, raw power of the main electrical transformer that supplied their town. On the chosen day, a crowd gathered at the base of a utility pole. Raj, dressed in his holy robes, began his ascent. His followers chanted and prayed below. He climbed with a serene confidence, a man about to shake hands with a god. He reached the top and faced the transformer, a humming, buzzing metal box of immense power. He looked down at the cheering crowd, raised his arms, and then, with a final declarative shout, he grabbed the 2 main high-voltage lines. In that instant, he was introduced to the difference between 12 volts and 25,000 volts. The result was not a holy miracle. It was a catastrophic physical event. A massive arc flash erupted, a miniature bolt of lightning that was brighter than the sun, instantly vaporizing the moisture on his skin. The sheer power of the high-voltage current surged through him, a force of nature that no amount of faith could ever insulate. His claim to be a holy man with power over electricity was tested against the unholy power of a municipal transformer, and the transformer won in a fraction of a second, proving that even the most profound spiritual beliefs are no match for the absolute and unforgiving laws of electrical conductivity. 1. The quest for the perfect romantic spot is a tale as old as time. But this particular story is a brutal reminder that sometimes mood and stupidity are walking hand in hand. We're in Ukraine on a warm summer night. Our heroes are a young couple, filled with that fiery, invincible passion that only young love can produce. They wanted to find a place that was private, unique, and a little bit dangerous. A spot that would make their romantic encounter feel like a scene from a movie. They didn't choose a moonlit beach or a secluded forest clearing. No, their idea of a perfect love nest was a set of active railway tracks. You have to understand the mindset here. For them, this wasn't just a pile of steel and gravel. It was symbolic. The cold, hard tracks represented the mundane world, and they were going to create a bubble of pure human passion right in the middle of it. They probably felt like rebels, poets, the main characters in their own epic love story. So they lay down together between the rails, the world around them melting away into the sounds of crickets and their own heartbeats. They were so completely engrossed in each other, so lost in the moment, that their senses tuned out everything else. They didn't feel the faint, deep vibration that started to hum through the tracks. They didn't hear the distant, mournful cry of a train horn cutting through the night air. They didn't see the single bright light that appeared on the horizon and began to grow steadily, relentlessly larger. The train, a massive, multi-ton freight locomotive, was not on a romantic journey. It was on a schedule. The engineer, sitting high in his cab, probably saw a strange, fleeting shape on the tracks ahead. A moment of surreal confusion, a desperate blast of the horn, the screech of emergency brakes that he knew were useless against the impossible math of momentum and distance. There was nothing he could do. The train didn't have the capacity for poetry or passion. It only had a destination. The couple had been searching for a moment of timeless passion, and they found it on a timeline that was brutally, unforgivingly precise. 2. There's a certain type of pet owner, the kind of person who doesn't just have a pet, but wields it like a personality trait. They don't get a golden retriever. They get a tarantula, a scorpion, or in this case, a piranha. Our story is about a man in Germany who was immensely proud of his toothy, aquatic roommate. He didn't just see a fish, he saw a statement, a living, swimming testament to how cool and edgy he was. He loved showing it off to his friends, tapping on the glass, boasting about its legendary appetite. One day, it was time to clean the piranha's tank, its glass kingdom. The proper, sane procedure would be to carefully net the fish and place it in a temporary container. But our hero saw this as an opportunity, a chance to prove the special bond he shared with his little carnivore. He was going to clean the tank with the fish still inside, to show everyone he wasn't afraid. He rolls up his sleeves and plunges his hands into the water, scrubbing away at the algae. The piranha just darts around, probably annoyed at this giant fleshy monster invading its home. Feeling a surge of confidence, our hero decides to get playful. He looks at his pet, smirks, and starts to playfully waggle his finger in the water, like you would with a puppy. "Who's a cute little killing machine?" "You are. Yes, you are," he probably cooed. For the piranha, this was not a cute game. It was a wriggling, fleshy worm appearing directly in front of its face. It wasn't personal. It was business. With the speed of instinct, the piranha did what piranhas have been doing for millions of years. It bit him. Hard. The man yanked his hand out of the water with a scream, looking down in disbelief to see the tip of his finger completely gone. The sudden shock, the searing pain, the sight of his own blood. It was too much for his brain to handle. He stumbled backward in a blind panic, lost his footing on the wet floor and fell, cracking his head fatally against the hard tile. He died right there on his kitchen floor. The irony is almost poetic. The piranha didn't kill him. A simple slip and fall did. The fish just provided the bloody, finger-shortening motivation. He wanted to show he had mastered nature, but in the end, he was taken down by a combination of his own hubris and a slippery floor. 3. The final entry in his own journal is a story that exists in that strange, terrifying space between scientific dedication and terminal arrogance. Our protagonist is a Russian scientist, a brilliant man working in a high-security lab with some of the deadliest substances known to humanity. His specific field of expertise? The Marburg virus, a nasty cousin of Ebola that essentially liquefies you from the inside out. He was a man who lived and breathed protocols. He understood the stakes. He knew that the thinnest layer of latex, the slightest breach in procedure, was the only thing standing between him and a horrific, agonizing death. He was meticulous, he was careful, but over the years, a subtle, dangerous change had taken place. Familiarity had bred a quiet, deep-seated confidence. He saw the virus not as an implacable enemy, but as a subject he had mastered. One day, while handling a sample, it happened. A tiny, almost insignificant mistake. A slip of the hand, a moment of distraction, and the needle, slick with the virus, pricked his finger through his double layer of gloves. It was a minuscule wound, but in his world, it was a gunshot. The protocol was clear. Declare an immediate emergency, begin post-exposure treatment, alert the entire facility. This was his only slim chance of survival. But the scientist didn't follow protocol. In a decision that still baffles the medical community, he did nothing. He simply took off his gloves, bandaged his finger, and told no one. Perhaps his pride was too great to admit a mistake. Perhaps he believed his own safety measures were so perfect that infection was impossible. Or perhaps, in a dark, twisted way, the scientist in him saw an opportunity. He had become his own experiment. He went home, and over the next 2 weeks, he began to document his own demise. With chilling scientific detachment, he chronicled every stage of the virus's brutal assault on his body in his personal journal. The initial fever, the crippling headaches, the hemorrhaging, the organ failure. He was a passenger in his own body, taking notes as it was systematically torn apart. He transformed his own death into his final, unauthorized research paper. He continued to write right up until the very end, his handwriting growing weaker and more erratic, until the entries finally, abruptly, stopped. He had dedicated his life to studying a deadly virus, and in his final act, he provided the most intimate, detailed data imaginable, a legacy written in his own blood. 4. The Ultimate Game of Chicken is a story that perfectly captures the teenage brain's unique ability to look at a terrible idea and see a glorious opportunity for immortality. We're in a small town, the kind of place where the most exciting thing to happen all week is the passing of the midnight freight train. For a group of local teenagers, this train wasn't just a part of the landscape, it was a challenge. It was their mechanical dragon, and they were the brave knights who would prove their courage by facing it down. They invented a game, a high-stakes ritual of bravery and bravado. They would stand on the tracks, side by side, as the train barreled towards them, its horn blasting, its single light cutting through the darkness like the eye of a monster. The goal was to be the last one to jump off the tracks before the train arrived. The winner got bragging rights, respect, and the temporary title of the toughest kid in town. On this particular night, the game was more intense than ever. The air was thick with tension and cheap bravado. The train appeared on the horizon. The ground began to vibrate. The boys lined up on the tracks, their hearts pounding in their chests. As the train got closer, the noise becoming a deafening roar, the first kid jumped, then another. The group thinned out until only 2 remained, locked in a silent battle of wills. One of them, seeing the immense wall of steel just seconds away, finally broke and leaped to safety. But our hero, the last one standing, wanted more than just a win. He wanted a legend. He wanted a story that would be told for years. He was going to wait until the absolute last possible fraction of a second. He stood his ground, a smirk on his face, the wind from the approaching train whipping through his hair. He could probably feel the heat from its engines. He was ready for his heroic last-second leap. But he made a tiny, fatal miscalculation. He underestimated the sheer, deceptive speed of a freight train. He thought he had another second. He didn't. He finally jumped, but his timing was off by a mere heartbeat. The edge of the locomotive caught him, its immense force turning his leap for glory into a final, tragic stumble. He had won the game. He was the undisputed champion. He just wasn't around to collect his prize. He had gambled everything for a fleeting moment of pure respect and discovered that the train always wins. 5. The final boarding call is a story about a man whose frustration with modern air travel went from angry tweet to terminal-wide disaster in record time. Our scene is a bustling Canadian airport. Our hero is a man who has just been informed that his flight is cancelled. We've all been there. The sigh of frustration. The long, soul-crushing line at the customer service desk. The quiet acceptance of your fate. But this man was not built for quiet acceptance. He was a man of action, a man who believed that the rules of civilized society were merely suggestions for other people. He decided he was going to stage a protest, not by holding a sign or chanting slogans. His protest was going to be a piece of performance art, a bold statement against the tyranny of the airlines. He stormed over to the baggage claim area, and with a look of righteous fury on his face, he climbed onto the baggage carousel. This was his stage. He probably imagined himself riding it around in a slow, dignified loop, a symbol of the stranded passenger, a hero for the common traveler. The other passengers just stared, a mix of confusion and, "I should probably film this," excitement. But our protester hadn't thought his plan through. He hadn't considered that the baggage carousel isn't just a loop, it's an entrance. As he rode along, feeling the righteous fire of his cause, he was carried inexorably towards the big black rubber curtains that lead to the mysterious, hidden world of the baggage handling system. He didn't jump off. He just rode right through them, disappearing from public view like a piece of lost luggage. On the other side, he found himself in a mechanical labyrinth of conveyor belts, rollers, and sorting machines, a place not designed for human beings. He was tumbled from one belt to another, a human pinball in a system designed to move suitcases. His one-man protest came to a sudden grinding halt when he became entangled in the powerful machinery. The entire baggage system, a marvel of modern logistics, was brought to a screeching stop by a single, very determined and very foolish man. When the airport staff finally located him, his protest had been noted, but not in the way he had intended. He had wanted to make a statement about his canceled flight, but the only statement he made was about the dangers of treating an industrial conveyor system like your personal soapbox. 6. The most powerful drain cleaner known to man is a tale of domestic warfare, a story about a man who faced a common household problem and decided to solve it with a solution that was anything but common. Our hero had a clogged toilet, a stubborn, unyielding blockage that mocked his every attempt with the plunger. He was frustrated. He was angry. He saw this not as a simple plumbing issue, but as a personal insult from an inanimate porcelain object. He decided it was time to escalate. Forget drain cleaner. Forget calling a plumber. He was going to bring out the heavy artillery. He went to his garage and returned not with a snake, but with a full gallon of gasoline. His logic was a thing of beautiful, terrifying simplicity. If gasoline can power a car, surely it can obliterate a toilet clog. He unscrewed the cap and poured the entire gallon of flammable liquid down the toilet bowl. The bathroom was instantly filled with a dizzying, eye-watering cloud of gasoline fumes. He stood back, admiring his work, probably feeling like a genius. But he wasn't done. The gasoline needed a catalyst, an ignition source to unleash its true, clog-destroying potential. So, he struck a match. In that split second, as the tiny flame flickered to life, he was probably imagining a satisfying whoosh that would clear the pipe and solve his problem forever. What he got was not a whoosh. What he got was a deafening, house-shaking explosion. The concentrated gasoline fumes in the small, enclosed bathroom detonated with the force of a bomb. The toilet itself was vaporized, turned into porcelain shrapnel. The walls blew out. The roof was lifted clean off its foundations. And our hero, the man who just wanted to unclog his toilet, was sent on a one-way, non-stop trip through the brand-new skylight where his ceiling used to be. He was launched into the air by a geyser of fire and fury, a human cannonball propelled by his own brilliant idea. When the fire department arrived, they found a scene of utter devastation. The bathroom was gone, the house was a wreck, and the clog, presumably, was no longer an issue. He had successfully cleared the blockage, but at a slightly higher cost than a bottle of Drano. 7. The Lobster and the Ill-Advised Hiding Spot is a beautiful story about a man whose criminal ambitions were ultimately foiled by his own terrible understanding of marine biology. Our scene is a grocery store, specifically the seafood department, where a majestic, live lobster sits in its tank, probably dreaming of the deep ocean, completely unaware it's about to become the star of a low-budget crime drama. Our protagonist is a shoplifter, a man who saw this delicious crustacean and decided it was going home with him free of charge. But how do you discreetly steal a live, kicking lobster? You can't just put it in your pocket. So, he devised a plan of such breathtaking audacity, it borders on performance art. He grabbed the lobster out of the tank, a wriggling, angry bundle of claws and antennae, and in a single, fluid motion, he stuffed it down the front of his trousers. This was his hiding spot, his personal, fleshy smuggling compartment. He probably thought he was a genius, a master of disguise. He casually adjusted himself and began to walk towards the exit, trying to look as normal as possible, despite the fact that he had a very angry, very much alive sea creature currently exploring his nether regions. The lobster, however, was not happy with its new accommodations. It had been abruptly removed from its comfortable, watery home and shoved into a dark, warm, and decidedly non-aquatic environment. And when lobsters are unhappy, they have a very specific, very effective way of expressing their displeasure. They use their claws. As our shoplifter neared the automatic doors, just moments away from a successful getaway, the lobster decided it had had enough. It clamped down with its powerful pincer on the most sensitive, most private, most you-do-not-touch-that area imaginable. The result was not a quiet whimper of discomfort. It was a high-pitched, soul-shattering shriek of pure, unadulterated agony that echoed through the entire grocery store. The man dropped to his knees, his carefully constructed composure instantly vaporized, his hands frantically trying to deal with the crustacean crisis happening in his pants. His screams immediately alerted the security guards, who rushed over to find a grown man writhing on the floor, apparently in a fight to the death with his own crotch. The subsequent arrest was, to put it mildly, embarrassing. He had tried to get a free meal, but instead, he got a very painful, very public, and irreversible vasectomy courtesy of an angry crustacean, proving there's more than one way to permanently remove yourself from the gene pool. 8. The shortcut through the parking garage is a tale of a man who was in such a hurry to escape the law that he ended up finding the fastest possible route back to ground level. Our story begins with a car thief in California, living life in the fast lane, literally. He's just boosted a car and is now engaged in a high-speed chase with the police. Sirens are wailing, tires are screeching. It's a classic scene. But the cops are sticking to him like glue. He needs a plan. He needs to lose them. He sees a multi-story parking garage and has a flash of inspiration. This is it, his sanctuary. His plan is to speed into the garage, race up the spiraling ramps, and hide on the top level. The cops will be confused. He'll have time to ditch the car and disappear into the urban jungle. It's a solid, if unoriginal, getaway strategy. He swerves off the street and into the garage, the squeal of his tires echoing off the concrete walls. He floors it, rocketing up the ramps, taking the tight turns at a speed that would make a professional stunt driver nervous. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3. He's a blur of stolen metal and bad decisions. He's so focused on gaining height, so consumed by the thrill of the ascent, that he's not really paying attention to where he's going. He's just thinking up. He finally reaches the top floor, the open-air roof of the parking garage. This is where he was supposed to stop, hide, and complete his brilliant escape. But in his adrenaline-fueled frenzy, he forgot the most important part of the plan. The stopping part. He shot up the final ramp at full speed and just kept going. He didn't slow down. He didn't turn. He crashed directly through the thin concrete barrier at the edge of the roof, the one that's only there to stop people who are parking, not people who are actively trying to achieve low Earth orbit. For a brief, glorious moment, the car was airborne, soaring silently through the city skyline. And then, gravity, which had been patiently waiting, decided to rejoin the chat. The car plunged several stories, landing back on the street below with a deafening metallic crunch, not far from where the chase had begun. He had successfully saved himself the time and effort of driving back down the ramps. His escape was, in a way, a complete success. He had lost the police, but in the process, he had also lost his battle with basic common sense and the unforgiving laws of physics. 9. The $5 victory that cost a fortune is a story that perfectly illustrates the concept of winning the battle, but losing the war in the most painful way imaginable. We find ourselves in a noisy, crowded bar in Louisiana, the kind of place where masculinity is measured in bold claims and stupid bets. Our hero, a man who clearly valued his pride far more than his internal organs, found himself in the middle of a heated challenge. The object of contention? A large, menacing jar of pickled ghost peppers sitting on the bar. For those unfamiliar, a ghost pepper isn't just spicy. It's a culinary supernova, a tiny red demon that exists solely to punish your taste buds. One of his friends, probably after a few too many beers, pointed at the jar and laid down the gauntlet. $5 to the man who could eat the entire thing. $5. The price of a cheap beer. A laughably small amount of money. But for our hero, it wasn't about the money. It was about glory. It was about honor. He looked at the jar, then at his skeptical friends, and accepted the challenge. The bar gathered around, a circle of cheering, jeering spectators ready to watch a man go to war with a vegetable. He opened the jar, the vinegary, spicy smell probably stinging his nostrils, and began his epic quest. The first pepper went down. A moment of silence, then a grimace. The second. Sweat started to bead on his forehead. By the fourth or fifth pepper, he was a mess. His face was beet red, tears were streaming from his eyes, and he was sweating so profusely it looked like he'd just run a marathon. But he would not be defeated. Egged on by the roaring approval of his friends, he powered through, shoveling pepper after pepper into his mouth, his esophagus screaming in protest. He was a gladiator, and the peppers were his lions. Finally, with one last heroic gulp, he swallowed the final pepper. The jar was empty. The crowd went wild. He had done it. He stood up, trembling but triumphant, and collected his prize, a crumpled $5 bill. But as the cheers faded, a new sensation began to take over. The ghost peppers, having conquered his mouth and throat, were now waging an all-out war on his insides. His throat began to swell, constricting with alarming speed. He started to gasp for air. His body, overwhelmed by the insane amount of capsaicin he had just ingested, went into full-blown anaphylactic shock. He collapsed on the floor of the bar, his $5 victory prize still clutched in his hand. He had won the bet. He had earned the respect of his drunk friends for 5 glorious minutes. But in his pursuit of that cheap victory, he had paid the ultimate price. He learned, far too late, that some bragging rights just aren't worth it. 10. The roach, the bug spray, and the Big Bang Theory is a powerful lesson in overkill. A story about a woman who saw a tiny problem and decided to solve it with a solution of truly apocalyptic proportions. Our scene is a quiet kitchen. Our hero is a woman who has just spotted her mortal enemy, a single, defiant cockroach, skittering across her pristine countertop. For many, this is a moment for a shoe, a rolled-up magazine, or a well-aimed paper towel. But for this woman, the sight of this insect triggered something deep and primal. This wasn't just a pest. It was an invader, a personal affront to her domestic tranquility. This called for total annihilation. She went to her cupboard and retrieved her weapon of choice, a large industrial-sized can of insecticide. She wasn't just going to kill this cockroach, she was going to erase it from existence. She aimed the nozzle and began to spray, and she didn't stop. She chased the roach around the kitchen, dousing it in a thick, choking cloud of poison. The roach ran under the stove behind the fridge, but she was relentless, emptying the entire can of bug spray into her small, enclosed kitchen until the air was a thick, flammable fog. The cockroach, presumably, was very, very dead. Victory was hers. She stood back, breathing heavily in the chemical haze, probably feeling a sense of profound satisfaction. But in her single-minded crusade against this one tiny insect, she had completely forgotten about the basic principles of chemistry. She had turned her kitchen into a giant sealed fuel air bomb, and all it needed was a spark. That spark came from the pilot light on her gas stove. The tiny, unassuming blue flame, which had been patiently waiting, kicked on to regulate the oven temperature. The moment it flickered to life, it ignited the highly concentrated insecticide fumes. The result wasn't just a fire, It was a massive explosion that blew the windows out, sent the cabinet doors flying off their hinges, and engulfed the entire room in a fireball. She had successfully taken out the cockroach. She had won the war, but she had also taken out her kitchen, her eyebrows, and a significant portion of her house. When the fire department arrived, they were probably baffled by the sheer scale of the destruction. It was a powerful and hilarious reminder that when you're trying to solve a small problem, it's generally a bad idea to use a solution that could be classified as a weapon of mass destruction. 1. The legend of the JATO rocket car is perhaps the holy grail of Darwin Awards lore. A story so perfectly, beautifully, and explosively stupid, it feels more like a modern American myth than a real event. Our hero is a man who embodied the spirit of bigger, faster, more. He was a former Air Force sergeant living in the Arizona desert, a man who had seen the awesome power of military technology and thought, "I want some of that for my car." His vehicle was a classic 1967 Chevy Impala, a beautiful but, in his eyes, tragically slow piece of machinery. His solution was not a bigger engine or a turbocharger. His solution was a JATO unit, a jet-assisted takeoff rocket designed to help monstrously heavy military cargo planes get off the ground from short runways. To the military, it's a tool of logistics. To our hero, it was the ultimate performance upgrade. He managed to acquire one, strapped it to the roof of his Impala, with the kind of confident engineering you only see from someone who is about to make a huge mistake, and drove out into the vast, empty desert. He found a long, straight stretch of asphalt that seemed to go on forever, the perfect runway for his grand experiment. He accelerated the car to about 100 miles per hour under its own power, took a deep, final breath of non-recirculated air, and flipped the switch to ignite the rocket. The result was not an acceleration, it was a teleportation. The JATO unit fired with the force of 1,000 angry gods, instantly pinning him to his seat and turning his classic American sedan into a low-altitude cruise missile. The sheer thrust was so immense that the tires, unable to handle the friction and speed, didn't just pop, they vaporized, melting off the rims and leaving two perfect black, glassy stripes seared into the surface of the road. He was now traveling at an estimated 560 kilometers per hour, a screaming metal blur with absolutely no way to control his destiny. The brakes, having been subjected to temperatures they were never designed for, had melted into a useless, glowing slag. The steering was just a suggestion the car was no longer listening to. For about a kilometer, he was the fastest man on four wheels, a land speed record holder with no audience and no future. His record-breaking run came to an end when the road presented a gentle curve. But at that speed, a gentle curve is a launch ramp. The car became airborne, soaring silently through the desert air for a moment before slamming, nose first, into the side of a massive cliff face, about 40 meters up. The impact left nothing behind but a deep, blackened crater in the rock and a legend for the ages. When state troopers eventually found the crash site, they were utterly baffled, unable to comprehend how a car could possibly embed itself so high up a sheer cliff, leaving no skid marks, only the mysterious, melted tracks far behind. It was the perfect and most permanent lesson in basic physics. 2. The amateur lumberjack who saw the tree but missed the forest, literally, is a cautionary tale that proves sometimes the most dangerous thing in the woods isn't a bear or a snake. It's a man with a chainsaw and a severe case of tunnel vision. Our story takes place in the quiet, dense woods of Pennsylvania. Our protagonist, a man who believed in the self-reliant, do-it-yourself spirit, decided it was time to clear a large old tree from his property. This wasn't just any tree, it was a massive oak, a true giant of the forest. He looked at it, saw the challenge, and with his trusty chainsaw in hand, he was ready for battle. He was so focused on this one single tree, so consumed by the task of felling it, that he failed to notice a critical detail about its surroundings. His target wasn't standing alone. Over the years, several other large, dead trees had fallen and come to rest against its massive trunk, leaning on it for support like a group of skeletal, wooden zombies. The forest was a complex, interconnected web of weight and tension, but all he saw was one tree that needed to come down. He fired up his chainsaw, the roar echoing through the peaceful woods, and began to cut. He was a man at work, focused, determined, the smell of sawdust and gasoline filling the air. He made his wedge cut, planned his line of fall, and then began the final back cut. He was so engrossed in the satisfying bite of the chain tearing through the wood that he never once glanced up to reevaluate the situation. The dead trees leaning against his target were what lumberjacks call widowmakers, unstable, unpredictable, and incredibly dangerous. But to him, they were just part of the background. With one final, triumphant buzz, the chainsaw sliced through the last remaining fibers of the trunk. He had done it. The mighty oak began to groan, to crack, to lean. But it didn't fall cleanly in the direction he had planned. The immense, combined weight of the dead trees leaning against it acted like a giant, chaotic battering ram. The entire tangled mess of timber, a multi-ton catastrophe of wood and gravity, began to fall in a completely unpredictable, twisting direction. Our lumberjack, who had just stepped back to admire his work, looked up in horror. He tried to run, to scramble to safety, but it was too late. The ground shook as the trees came crashing down, and he was found directly under the main trunk of the very oak he had set out to conquer. He had been so focused on taking down one tree that he failed to see the much larger, more complex system he was messing with. He became a permanent part of his own logging operation, a tragic, crushed monument to the dangers of missing the bigger picture. 3. The romantic gesture that went up in a glorious, unscheduled fireball is a story about a man whose love was so grand, so passionate, that it simply could not be contained by normal, non-explosive means. We're in Kansas, where a young man, let's call him Cody, was about to propose to his high school sweetheart. This wasn't going to be some simple, on-one-knee proposal. No, Cody was a showman. He wanted a moment so memorable, so incredibly romantic, it would be told at their anniversary parties for the next 50 years. His plan was a multi-stage masterpiece of grand gestures. First, he arranged for a small airplane to fly over a scenic park at a precise time, pulling a giant banner that read, "Shannon, will you marry me?" It was epic, it was cinematic, but it wasn't enough. For the grand finale, as the plane flew overhead, Cody himself would personally light a series of celebratory fireworks, creating a dazzling, ground-based pyrotechnics show to seal the deal. To achieve this, he positioned his pickup truck in the middle of the field, its bed serving as his personal launch pad. He carefully arranged the fireworks, a mix of mortars, rockets, and fountains, ready for their big moment. And right next to this impressive arsenal, he placed the large, open cardboard box containing all the other fireworks. The day arrived. The timing was perfect. Shannon was there, the sun was setting, and in the distance, they could hear the faint drone of the approaching airplane. Cody, his heart pounding with love and excitement, stood in the bed of his truck, a long-handled lighter in his hand, ready to unleash his symphony of light. As the plane came into view, the banner unfurling beautifully behind it, he began his show. He lit the first firework. Whoosh! A shower of gold sparks shot into the sky. He lit another. Crackle! Pop! A fountain of glittering silver. He was a master pyrotechnician, a conductor of celebratory explosions. He reached for his next firework, the lighter still lit in his hand. And that's when a single, traitorous spark, a tiny, almost invisible ember, drifted from the lighter and floated gently down, landing with impossible, heartbreaking precision directly inside the open box filled with the rest of his high-powered fireworks. For a split second, nothing happened. And then, the entire box erupted. It wasn't a show, it was a detonation. A massive, uncontrolled, chain reaction explosion of every single firework he owned, all going off at once, right at his feet. The romantic gesture instantly transformed into an unplanned, chaotic, and very personal pyrotechnics display. Cody was engulfed in a massive, swirling ball of fire, sparks, and whistling rockets. The proposal was, in a way, unforgettable. The plane flew overhead with its romantic question, while below, a tragedy unfolded in a series of spectacular, multicolored explosions. He had wanted to create a moment of pure magic, but ended up creating a very different kind of spectacle, one that ensured his bride-to-be would never forget the day he proposed, for all the wrong reasons. 4. The man who brought a baseball bat to a bee fight is a timeless story of territorial warfare. a cautionary tale that proves when you declare war on thousands of tiny flying insects, you'd better have an exit strategy. Our story unfolds in the peaceful backyard of a home in Oklahoma. But for the homeowner, it was not peaceful. It was a war zone. A massive buzzing beehive, the size of a basketball, hung menacingly from the branch of a large tree. To our hero, this wasn't a marvel of nature. It was an enemy fortress, an occupying army that had to be driven from his land. He was not a man to call an exterminator or a beekeeper. That was a sign of weakness. He was going to handle this problem himself, with good old-fashioned American ingenuity and brute force. His weapon of choice? Not bug spray, not smoke. His weapon was a Louisville Slugger, a heavy wooden baseball bat. His plan was as simple as it was breathtakingly idiotic. He was going to walk up to the hive and smash it to pieces like a piñata at a birthday party from hell. He approached the tree, his knuckles white as he gripped the bat, his jaw set in a look of grim determination. He took a few practice swings, probably feeling like a legendary slugger stepping up to the plate in the World Series. He took a deep breath, and with a mighty, two-handed swing that would have made Babe Ruth proud, he connected with the hive. The impact was spectacular. The hive exploded in a shower of wax, honey, and very, very angry bees. For a split second, he probably felt a surge of victory. He had destroyed their home. He had won. But his victory was short-lived. From the wreckage of their colony, a living, buzzing cloud of pure, unadulterated rage erupted. Thousands of bees, their home shattered, their queen possibly threatened, swarmed into the air with one single unified purpose: to destroy the monster who had attacked them. He was instantly enveloped, a walking, screaming target in a vortex of stingers and fury. The buzzing was probably deafening. Panic, a feeling he hadn't planned for, took over. He dropped the bat and tried to run, flailing his arms wildly, but it was useless. In his blind terror, he tripped over a root and fell to the ground, landing directly underneath the shattered remains of the hive. His fall was the worst possible thing he could have done. It gave the swarm perfect, stationary access to every inch of his body. They covered him, delivering hundreds, if not thousands, of stings. He had successfully taken down the beehive. He had won the battle. But the hive, in its final dying act, had decisively won the war. He had wanted to reclaim his backyard, but ended up losing his place in the gene pool, a victim of his own stunningly poor pest control strategy. 5. The hide-and-seek champion of 2008, whose final hiding spot was a little too good, is a tragic comedy that serves as a powerful lesson in the importance of knowing your own dimensions. Our story unfolds in a quiet suburban home in Washington state. Our protagonist, a man who clearly believed he was the king of practical jokes, decided he was going to pull off the ultimate prank on his wife. His plan was simple, yet ambitious. He was going to scare the living daylights out of her by hiding in the laundry chute. For those who grew up in older, multi-story houses, you know what this is. A narrow metal tube that runs from the upstairs bathroom down to the laundry room in the basement. A gravity-powered delivery system for dirty clothes. To our hero, it wasn't just a convenience, it was the perfect hiding spot. He probably imagined the scene with glee. His wife, home from work, would hear a strange scratching sound from the walls. Then, as she put a load of laundry in, he would jump out with a mighty boo, giving her a story to tell her friends for years. It was going to be hilarious. So while his wife was out, he put his brilliant plan into action. He went to the second-floor bathroom, opened the small door to the laundry chute, and prepared for his descent. He probably didn't even hesitate, a giddy, childlike excitement fueling his terrible idea. He sat on the edge and launched himself into the narrow, dark tube, expecting a quick, fun slide down to the basement. But he had made a critical and fatal miscalculation. He had the slender, athletic build of a man who spends his weekends on the couch, not the wiry frame of a professional chimney sweep. As he slid down, he hit a narrow bend in the pipe, probably an elbow joint designed to navigate around the house's internal structure. And he got stuck. Not just a little bit stuck, he was wedged in tight, like a cork in a bottle. His initial amusement probably turned to annoyance, then to a dawning claustrophobic horror. He was trapped in a dark, vertical metal coffin, unable to move up or down. But the real danger wasn't just being stuck. The way he was positioned, with his body compressed in the tight bend, put an immense amount of pressure on his diaphragm, making it impossible for him to take a full breath. Every shallow, panicked gasp became harder than the last. He was being slowly, silently, asphyxiated by his own brilliant prank. His wife came home a few hours later, probably wondering where he was. She went about her evening, completely unaware that her husband was just a few feet away, trapped inside the walls of their own home. It was only when she went to do a load of laundry that she noticed the chute was blocked. She found him later, after a frantic search, a tragic, silent testament to a joke that had gone horribly, horribly wrong. The prank had worked in a way. She was, without a doubt, absolutely terrified. 6. The Great Hornet Offensive that chose the wrong target is a masterpiece of petty revenge, a story that proves when you try to weaponize nature, nature often has its own ideas about who the real enemy is. Our story is about a man who had a noisy neighbor problem. We've all been there, the loud music, the late-night parties, the barking dog. But our hero wasn't the type to knock on the door or call the police. His approach to conflict resolution was more biological. He decided he was going to deliver a package to his neighbor, a very special, very angry package. His weapon of choice? A large, thriving hornet's nest. He had found one in his own yard, a buzzing, papery orb of pure, concentrated fury. And a brilliant, terrible idea was born. He was going to carefully transport this nest to his neighbor's front door and shove it through the mail slot. It was the perfect, anonymous revenge. His neighbor would come home to a house filled with thousands of angry, stinging insects. It was a plan of beautiful, diabolical simplicity. So, one evening, he put his plan into motion. He probably wore a ridiculous amount of protective gear, looking like a low-budget beekeeper. He carefully, painstakingly, detached the nest from the tree, a buzzing, vibrating ball of imminent doom in his hands. He crept across the lawn to his neighbor's house, his heart pounding with the thrill of his own evil genius. He got to the front door and located his target, the narrow metal mail slot. Now came the tricky part. He had to shove a large, fragile paper nest filled with furious hornets through a small, unforgiving opening. He positioned the nest and began to push. But the nest, being a delicate paper structure, didn't just slide through. It broke apart. It crumbled in his hands, right there on his neighbor's front porch. And suddenly, he was standing in the middle of a swirling, deafeningly loud cloud of thousands of enraged hornets. They were free, they were confused, and they were very, very angry. And in that moment, finding themselves trapped in a small, enclosed entryway, they didn't fly off to find the neighbor inside. They chose the most immediate, most deserving, and most panicked target available, their aggressor. Our hero was instantly covered, a screaming, flailing epicenter in a storm of stingers. He had wanted to unleash a plague upon his neighbor, but instead, he had unleashed it upon himself. His brilliant plan for revenge had backfired in the most painful and ironic way possible. He had tried to use nature as a weapon, and nature, in its infinite buzzing wisdom, had correctly identified him as the true villain of the story. 7. The samurai sword argument that made a very sharp point is a story that serves as a powerful and very pointy reminder that some things are not toys, and that winning an argument is not worth, well, dying for. Our scene is a messy college apartment late at night. Our hero and his roommate are in the middle of a drunken, rambling argument about something incredibly stupid, as most late-night college arguments are. Maybe it was about who finished the milk, or whose turn it was to do the dishes. Whatever it was getting heated. At some point, the argument turned to the topic of bravery and fear. Our hero, his judgment clouded by cheap beer and youthful ego, decided he needed to make a grand, irrefutable statement to prove his own fearlessness. He looked around the room for a prop, and his eyes landed on the crown jewel of their apartment's decor, a decorative but very real samurai sword hanging on the wall. He stumbled over, grabbed the katana from its sheath, and held it aloft. "You think I'm scared?" he probably slurred. "I'm not scared of anything." His roommate, probably a bit nervous now, told him to put the sword down. But this only encouraged him. He decided he would demonstrate just how harmless this decorative object was. "It's not even sharp," he declared. a statement he had absolutely no evidence to support. To prove his point, he did something that will forever be enshrined in the Hall of Fame of bad ideas. He took the gleaming, razor-sharp tip of the katana, placed it directly against the center of his own chest, and with a triumphant drunken cry of, "See!" he dramatically and forcefully leaned forward onto the blade. He probably expected the tip to just press harmlessly against his sternum, proving his point. He had critically and fatally underestimated either the sharpness of the blade or the relatively small amount of force required to puncture the human torso. The sword didn't just press against him. It slid into his chest with sickening ease. The triumphant look on his face was probably instantly replaced by one of profound, shocking, and very final surprise. The argument was over. He had won, in a way. He had proven that he wasn't afraid. He had also proven that the sword was, in fact, very sharp. His roommate was left standing in stunned silence, the victor of a debate he never wanted to win. It's a grim reminder that when you're trying to prove a point, it's generally best not to use your own vital organs as evidence. 8. The Man Who Tried to Outdrink a Snakebite is a story that sounds like a tall tale a grizzled old bartender would tell you. A legend of toxic bravado and profoundly flawed medical theories. Our scene is a rural village in Brazil. Our hero, a man who probably wrestled crocodiles for fun, was out working in the fields when it happened. He was bitten by a jararaca, one of Brazil's most venomous and feared pit vipers. For any normal person, this is a code red life or death emergency. You stay calm, you immobilize the limb, and you get to a hospital for anti-venom as fast as humanly possible. But our hero was not a normal person. He looked at the two small puncture wounds on his leg, looked at the snake slithering away, and instead of feeling fear, he felt anger. And then, he had an idea. A brilliant, alcohol-soaked idea. He refused all offers of help. He wasn't going to a hospital, he was going to a bar. But first, he had to take care of some business. He hunted down the snake that bit him, captured it, and put it in a bottle. He then strode into the local tavern, slammed the bottle with the very angry, very venomous snake onto the bar, and ordered a glass of cachaça, a potent Brazilian rum. As the other patrons stared in disbelief, he began to drink. Heavily. He boasted to everyone who would listen that he didn't need a doctor. He had his own cure. The alcohol, he claimed, would neutralize the venom. He would simply get so drunk that the poison wouldn't be able to affect him. It was a bold, if completely insane, medical hypothesis. For about an hour, he was the king of the bar. He drank, he laughed, he showed off the snake that had dared to challenge him. But then, the venom, which had been patiently working its way through his system, began to win the war against the rum. His speech started to slur, not just from the alcohol. His vision blurred. He started to feel a creeping paralysis. The crowd's amusement turned to horror as he began to have violent convulsions, his body thrashing on the floor of the bar. In his final spastic moments, as his body was shutting down, he was consumed by one last primal urge: revenge. He managed to grab the bottle, open it, and as the snake's head emerged, he lunged forward and bit the snake back. It was his final, defiant, and utterly pointless act. He died minutes later, a victim of his own arrogance and a complete misunderstanding of how both venom and alcohol work. The snake, presumably, was left with a very confusing story to tell its snake friends. 9. The gasoline-powered de-icer and the human torch is a story that comes from the heart of a brutal Canadian winter. A cautionary tale about a man who faced a minor inconvenience and decided to solve it with a solution that was pure, unadulterated fire. Our protagonist woke up one morning to find his car sealed shut by a thick layer of ice. The door lock was completely frozen solid. It was a common problem, one that usually required a can of de-icer spray and a few minutes of patience. But our hero was not a patient man. He needed to get to work, and he needed to get to work now. He decided that the slow chemical approach was for lesser men. He needed a faster, more direct solution. He needed fire. He went to his garage and came back with a can of gasoline and a lighter. His logic was a thing of simple, terrifying beauty. He would pour a tiny bit of gasoline on the frozen lock, and the flame would instantly melt the ice. It was a high-speed, high-temperature solution to a low-temperature problem. He carefully dribbled a small amount of gasoline onto the car door, aiming for the lock. But in the freezing cold, his hands were clumsy. A small, seemingly insignificant amount of gasoline spilled from the can and soaked into the sleeve of his thick, synthetic winter jacket. He didn't even notice. He was focused on the mission. He stepped back, took out his lighter, and with a confident flick, he sparked it to life. The gasoline fumes around the lock ignited instantly in a satisfying whoosh. But that wasn't the only thing that ignited. The flame, hungry for more fuel, leaped from the car door to his gasoline-soaked sleeve. In an instant, his entire arm was engulfed in flames. The synthetic material of his winter jacket, which was essentially a wearable plastic bag, didn't just burn. It melted, sticking to his skin and fueling the fire. Panic, a feeling far more intense than his initial impatience, took over. He started to scream and run around in circles, a human torch in the middle of a snowy landscape. But running only fanned the flames, making them burn hotter, faster. His attempt to thaw a tiny frozen lock had resulted in a full-body conflagration. He had wanted to get into his car, but ended up creating a blazing pyre from which there was no escape. His car remained locked, a silent, frozen witness to a man who had tried to fight ice with fire, and had lost in the most spectacular way possible. 10. The virtual reality flight that had a very real landing is a story that marks a new, terrifying frontier in the world of human error. A place where the line between the digital world and the real one becomes so blurred, it simply disappears. Our story takes place in a high-rise apartment building in South Korea. Our protagonist is a man who was not just a gamer. He was a pioneer, an early adopter of the then-new technology of virtual reality. He had a top-of-the-line headset, powerful headphones, the whole setup. When he put on that headset, he wasn't in his small apartment anymore. He was in another universe. The game he was playing was a fantasy epic, a world of magic, monsters, and most importantly for our story, the ability to fly. The game's VR system was incredibly immersive. It perfectly simulated the feeling of soaring through the clouds, of swooping down into valleys, of feeling the wind rush past you. For our player, this wasn't just a game. It was an experience so real, so all-consuming, that his brain began to accept it as reality. He became so deeply immersed, so completely lost in the digital world, that he forgot where the game ended and his living room began. He had been playing for hours, his senses completely dominated by the virtual world. In the game, he was standing on the edge of a high cliff preparing to take flight. He could see the beautiful, pixelated landscape stretching out before him. He could feel the virtual wind. He could hear the epic, soaring soundtrack in his headphones. In the real world, he was standing in the middle of his living room, just a few feet away from his large, open apartment window. His brain, now completely rewired by the immersive experience, saw the open window not as a window, but as the sky. It saw the city lights far below, not as a danger, but as the beautiful world he was about to explore. He decided to fly. He took a running start across his living room, his body mimicking the actions of his in-game avatar, and with a triumphant leap of faith, he jumped. Not in the game, in real life. He jumped, with full force and conviction, directly through the open window of his high-rise apartment. For a brief, terrifying moment, he was actually flying, just like in the game. But the laws of virtual reality do not apply in the real world. Gravity, a feature that was apparently disabled in his game, logged back on with a vengeance. His flight was tragically and brutally short. He had become so immersed in his digital escape that he had forgotten the most basic rule of the physical world. You can't fly. He had achieved a level of immersion that game developers can only dream of. But in doing so, he had found the ultimate and most permanent way to log out. All right, time for a debate. Who's the bigger threat to themselves? The arrogant fool who's 100% confident in their bad idea, or the blissfully ignorant one who has no idea they're in danger? Pick a side in the comments. If these stories made your own bad decisions feel less terrible, hit the like button. Subscribe for more proof that common sense is a superpower.